Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1112 for June 8th, 2025. Coming up in a few minutes.
In the course of discovery, trying to prove theories, you're going to disprove two other theories that you've previously held. And that exploration is maddening, but it's also incredibly enticing as somebody who is always striving to figure out how something works.
This week we're talking with a couple of master blenders and one protege. Dr. Bill Lumsden is, in addition to his work at Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, the master blender for Sir Davis American Whiskey, and Cameron George is his protege, handling the day-to-day finishing and blending work for the brand. We'll hear from both of them, along with another veteran master blender, Helen Mulholland of Sazerac's new Hawks Rock Distillery in Ireland. She just introduced Garavogue, a 20-year-old Irish single malt finished in 8 different types of casks. I'll have my tasting notes for Garavogue in the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and we'll have Behind the Label and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hello, Gabriel Cardarella for Jewers. The 2025 release of our Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is a masterpiece, crafted for those who appreciate the finer things, whether on the course or in a glass. More on that in a moment.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Brown-Forman shares fell to their lowest price since 2013 Thursday after the company reported its full year and fourth quarter earnings. The 18% decline in Brown-Forman's shares was the biggest one-day drop for the company in 17 years and was driven by a 5% decline in sales for the fiscal year compared to a year ago. Jack Daniel's sales were off by 6%, but the one bright spot was an 8% gain in sales for Woodford Reserve and Old Forester bourbons. CEO Lawson Whiting blamed not only the overall economy and tariffs, but the impact of GLP-1 weight loss drugs on drinking, along with legalized cannabis sales and the decline of drinking among younger adults. He's projecting another decline in organic sales for fiscal 2026 as well. More signs of trouble in Kentucky. The Luca Mariano Distillery in Danville is planning a grand opening celebration this coming Friday the 13th, but the company faces lawsuits and liens alleging the owners owe nearly $4 million in unpaid construction bills. The Lexington Herald-Leader reports the distillery has also entered into a new partnership with a Denver-based investment group that specializes in distressed debt acquisitions. In addition, the Whiskey House Distillery faces a $1.7 million lien from Busick Construction over unpaid bills. CEO David Mandel told the Herald-Leader he expected to resolve the lien quickly after suing a buyer who signed a contract for thousands of barrels of whiskey, then reneged on the deal and never made payments. Now might not seem like the time to build a new distillery, but Japan's Karuizawa Distillers announced plans this week for a new distillery in Furano, Hokkaido. The distillery is being built in partnership with real estate developer Seibu Holdings, which has ski resorts and golf courses nearby. Vice President and Master Blender Ian Chang says the new Furalist Distillery will build on what the company has done with its Komoro Distillery.
At KDI, we don't simply wait for whiskey to mature. We build for the long journey, and every decision we make is guided by that vision. Furano, however, represents something new, an opportunity built not just on hope, but on experience.
The name Furalist comes from combining Furano with Bliss, and the new distillery is set to open in 2028. Scotland's Argyll and Bute Council has cleared the path for construction to begin on the Dalriata Distillery in Campbellton. Work is set to begin later this year on the project, which received its building warrants this week. The distillery is being built by North Star Spirits and will have a capacity of 850,000 liters of alcohol annually. It'll also have an on-site bottling plant in addition to warehousing. Back to Brown-Forman for a minute. I mentioned that Old Forester was one of the few bright spots for the company, and now Old Forester is taking its top-of-the-line bourbon nationwide. The President's Choice bourbon had only been available at the Old Forester Distillery in Louisville until now. It's being joined for the first time by a President's Choice rye whiskey. Both single-barrel offerings will go on sale at the distillery this coming Saturday morning and will be available at select retailers nationwide. Both are priced at $225 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for both releases later on. Heaven Hill's Old Fitzgerald brand is getting a new flagship bottled in bond bourbon. The 7-year-old bottled in bond features the same wheated bourbon mash bill as the semi-annual decanter releases, but master distiller Connor O'Driscoll says it'll be available year-round.
On the production schedule, we don't say Elijah Craig or Larceny or whatever it is. We have H.H. Reg, we got OFD, and OFD, which stands for Old Fitz Distillate, is our wheated bourbon mash bill, 68% corn, 20% wheat, and 12% malted barley. As you well know, we've been bringing out the decanter series twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year for the last several years. And of course, it gets great acclaim. People line up all night to get it, but because it's so allocated, there's a lot of disappointed folks out there. So we kind of had a two-prong, like how do we make this great whiskey more available to our fans, and how do we honor the legacy of this fantastic brand? It's been around. Old Fitz has been around since the 1880s or something like that. So that was kind of the genesis of it, and you kind of leaning into the heritage of the Old Fitz brand, what we've done with the decanter series, and of course the great liquid in there. So all of those parts came together and brought out a 7-year-old bottle and bond.
The limited edition decanters will still be available each spring and fall, and the new 7-year-old offering carries a recommended retail price of $59.99 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at whiskycast.com. High West is out with its annual limited edition Prisoner's Share whiskey. It's a blend of straight whiskeys finished in red wine casks from the Prisoner Wine Company and combines High West's own rye whiskey with whiskeys from MGP, the Bardstown Bourbon Company, and an unnamed Kentucky distillery. It'll sell for $175 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Penelope Bourbon has released its first cigar-focused whiskey. Cigar Sessions Chapter 1 is a 6-year-old whiskey meant to be enjoyed with medium-bodied cigars. It's a unique blend of bourbon, American single malt, and American light whiskey, and will be available in limited amounts starting this month for around $80 each. Redemption Whiskey has been doing a lot with extra-aged whiskeys, releasing a 36-year-old bourbon and an 18-year-old rye in the past. Now comes an 18-year-old bourbon to join the trio. The whiskey itself comes from MGP, and master blender Alan Kennedy says it was a whiskey crying out to be bottled.
Going into this, it was funny because I was talking to, I have my assistant blender and I were going down to Castle and Key to look at the barrels, and we were joking, and I'm like, I told the CFO and I told my boss, the winemaker, and I was like, unless this is fantastic, I'm not doing it. And I was like, because I'm not going to put out a product that doesn't deserve to be put out. And we got there and we start pulling samples and we're drilling the barrels out. And I looked at my assistant and I'm like, yep. He was like, what? And I was like, I was like shaking my head and I handed him a glass and he was like, oh my God. And I was like, yeah, we're making this one. I was like, we're doing it. And we had about 72 barrels at that point. Some of them ended up not making it to the world, through evaporation and things like that. But we pulled samples of every single barrel, and I was like, and we went through every single one of them, and we ended up with about 69 of them. And it was just, I love the cherry and the vanilla, the sweet corn still there in the background. Of course, that's going to come down, but it's still there. It still tastes like a bourbon, but like that leather that you want, and that old oak is there, and it's just good medium long finish. It just, this one evoked memories of like summer in Kentucky.
Only 2,400 bottles will be available with a recommended retail price of $399.99 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. Speaking of Castle and Key, the distillery is out with the 4th edition in its partnership with the Kentucky Black Bourbon Guild. The untold story of Kentucky whiskey celebrates the life of Dallas Peters, who played a pivotal behind-the-scenes role at the Old Taylor Distillery at a time when black workers were largely banned from the industry. 100% of the proceeds from sales of the 204 bottles will be donated to scholarship funds that support diversity in the distilling industry. Here is something from RD1 Spirits that more distilleries could emulate. The brand is releasing a Sister Cities whiskey that pairs Lexington with its sister cities in Shinnodaka, Japan, and Deauville, France, by finishing with French oak and Mizunara oak staves. The whiskey sells for $69.99 a bottle through the distillery's shop in Lexington and its website. Lost Lantern's summer collection is coming out this month and celebrates the rise of estate distilleries that grow their own grain. The collection highlights Nevada's Frey Ranch and California's Corbin Cash distilleries and features 2 new additions in Illinois' Whiskey Acres and Minnesota's Far North Spirits. The collection features Farmers Fields bourbons and ryes, blending whiskeys from those distilleries, along with 6 single-cask releases from the 4 distilleries. The collection goes on sale June 25th. Turning to Scotland now, Bruichladdich has released its latest Port Charlotte Cask Exploration Series bottling. This edition is finished in Syrah wine casks and was distilled in 2013 using barley peated to 40 parts per million of phenols. It spent 4 years in the Syrah casks and will carry a price tag of $150 a bottle. Independent bottler Alexander Walker has released a 49-year-old 1973 Highland single malt just in time for Father's Day. It's a sherry cask-finished whiskey from an undisclosed distillery that sells for $999 a bottle through the Alexander Walker website. From Ireland comes word of a new Redbreast 15-year-old cask-strength edition. It's being released to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Redbreast 15-year-old and comes from a blend of 15 specially selected casks. It's available exclusively through the Middleton Distillery Collection website for €130 a bottle. Regrettably, the site does not ship to the U.S. And finally, Washington's Woodinville Whiskey has released its oldest rye whiskey to date this weekend. The 8-year-old rye was distilled from grain grown on the Omlin family farm in Quincy, Washington. It was taken back to the Eastern Washington farm to mature after it was distilled in Woodinville. The 100-proof whiskey carries a recommended retail price of $129.99 a bottle. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's open up the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. Tickets are still available for the Washington Nationals Buffalo Trace Dinner in the Bullpen this coming Thursday night in Washington, D.C. The Apollo Inn in Melbourne, Australia hosts a Sullivan's Cove tasting on Saturday. The Spirit of Toronto is hosting its inaugural Whiskey A event featuring Canadian distilleries on Friday, June 20th in Toronto. Bonham's Skinner has an auction of rare whiskeys on the 26th in Boston, and the Erin Malt and Music Festival is the weekend of June 27th in Lacranza, Scotland. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Dewar's 19-year-old Champions Edition is more than just exceptional whiskey. It's a tribute to the U.S. Open Championship. Each year's limited edition release is crafted to honor the host course, integrating its spirit through a unique cask finish. For the 2025 tournament at Oakmont in Pennsylvania, Dewar's continues this tradition with an exceptional 19-year-old whiskey, double-aged, then finished in a way that nods to Pennsylvania's long-standing connection to apple brandy. Created by 6-time Master Blender of the Year Stephanie McLeod, this year's edition is finished in Calvados apple brandy casks, imparting layers of green apples, apricots, citrus, warm spice, and a touch of honey. This isn't just a tribute, it's a masterclass in blending. Seek it out, savor every drop, and trust me, you'll be glad you did. Please enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025, Dewar's is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 43% alcohol by volume.
This week on WhiskyCast In-Depth, we'll hear from 2 master whiskey makers and a protege. In a few minutes, Dr. Bill Lumsden and Sir Davis Master Blender Cameron George will join us. But first, Sazerac unveiled the first release from its Hawks Rock distillery Tuesday night at an event on New York City's Roosevelt Island. Garavogue is a 20-year-old Irish single malt, finished in 8 different types of casks by Ireland's first female master blender, Helen Mulholland. Given her long standing as the master blender at Bushmills, you might expect that the whiskey came from there, but it didn't. It was originally distilled at Cooley Distillery, and Sazerac acquired the casks when it bought the former Loch Gill Distillery 3 years ago. Helen is also the chair of the Irish Whisky Association, and we sat down for a chat after dinner.
Garavogue, as we've just tasted, is a 20-year-old single Irish malt, and it has been matured in 8 different types of barrels, 8 different types of cask. So each cask imparts a different flavour, and so that you will be able to taste each single cask in the blend. It's an absolute passion of mine to work with all the different types of beautiful casks that we have here. And Garavogue is about subtlety, but allowing complexity and variation, and allowing you to taste every single different type of cask.
We've been watching and waiting for 3 years to see what you were going to come out with first. What prompted you to do Garavogue first?
Garavogue is very special and has a very special part in my heart and in my experience. I really wanted to bring out an aged single malt. That's where my passion lies at the minute. And Garavogue is incredibly special because each different release of Garavogue will be different. So once it's gone, it's gone. So this is a single malt at the moment, but it may be a different type of whiskey, a different type of cask finish, and each different release will provide something really unusual and special to the market.
How are things at the distillery now? You're still under construction and renovation after 3 years after Sazerac took over the place. When will it be finished?
The distillery and the visitor centre will be at least a 10-year project. We're incredibly lucky that we have 100 acres. We have 7 acres on our roof at the moment. We also have a large, historic and beautiful house that we will be returning to its natural grandeur. We also have a stable yard, and each of those will be carried out respectfully, but it takes time, and we also want to build the brands before that.
I want to talk about your history. How did you get into blending in the first place all those years ago?
My whole career has been unexpected, but an absolute pleasure. I studied food technology and started work in the lab of Bushmills. And from there I became quality manager, environmental manager, health and safety manager, even engineering, and then I became technical manager. And throughout that whole time, my love of blending was there. And I was incredibly lucky that I was made blender probably 20 years ago. And it's an incredible role. It's probably the best role in the whole world, is being able to blend whiskey, to work with flavours, to work with liquids that are living and breathing, and all those beautiful casks.
You've got to have at least one good Colum Egan story.
Oh gosh, one wouldn't be enough. And I couldn't possibly comment.
Okay. How has your blending style evolved over the years? It's a question I ask a lot of blenders, but it has to have evolved somewhat.
It does. As your tastes change, your perceptions change. I love subtlety. I think, as I said tonight, that you shouldn't have to shout to be heard. There should be beauty in everything that you do. So I say Garavogue is all about individual casks combining together. I do love a full cask finish, but I think I'm probably happier with what I do and more prepared to do what I want to do.
Let's put on your IWA hat for a moment. As chair of the Irish Whisky Association, how is the state of Irish whisky these days?
Well, I mean, Irish whisky is the same as all other liquids. There's market fluctuations at the moment, but we're still an incredible industry, and we still have a huge amount of distilleries here on the island of Ireland.
Is the industry healthy?
The industry is in a period of flux at the moment. But again, it's all about timing and taking the time to settle at the moment. But the Irish whisky industry has always been able to overcome any issues that may have come across. I mean, we've been here for many, many hundreds of years.
Give me a sense of the future of Hawks Rock Distillery.
Oh, Hawks Rock is going to be an incredible distillery. I mean, we have 100 acres of an estate to work with. We have a distillery capable of 1 million litres of alcohol. And Hawks Rock will be something new and unique. And it will be, as with all Sazerac brands, we will honour tradition but embrace change.
What's the difference between blending for Hawks Rock and blending for Paddy's?
There will be two very different liquids, and again, we're working with Hawks Rock as a single malt at the moment.
So you're not blending Paddy's?
Well, Hawks Rock will not be associated with paddy.
Okay. Fair enough. Define success for you as a blender.
Contentment in what I do. I love people to taste my whiskies, to enjoy them. I think that's what success is about.
Do you have your own personal blend at home?
I think every blender has. But again, your tastes of whiskey change depending on the environment you're in, with whether you're with friends. As you know, Mark, we're like, when you're sitting with a group of friends, you may have a very different whiskey to when you're alone with your loved ones beside a fire. Your tastes change depending on company and environment.
What goes into your personal blend?
Oh, it's always a single malt. It's always a bourbon. But I do like an acacia wood finish.
Garavogue will sell for $199 a bottle and will be available in the U.S., Ireland, the U.K., and travel retail, along with Sazerac's new Legacy DeForge online platform powered by Block Bar. I'll have my tasting notes for it in a few minutes. Now, it's been almost a year since Beyonce released her Sir Davis American Whiskey, created by Dr. Bill Lumsden of Glenmorangie and Ardbeg fame. Cameron George is his protege and handles the day-to-day tasks of blending Sir Davis. I talked with both of them at the Moet Hennessy USA office in New York City the day after a sold-out Beyonce concert at MetLife Stadium. First of all, what's going on with Sir Davis that we need to know about? It's been almost a year since the introduction.
I think the first thing I would say that you need to know about is that we've now got it really well established. More and more people are aware of the brand, know a bit about what it is, and it's starting to win some accolades in competitions. So we are highly proud of that and very thrilled about that. Cam, what would you say?
Yeah, my only addition to that would be in rolling out, there were some wonderful opportunities for us to educate people, especially around how we folded in some Scottish sensibilities, a Japanese approach to whiskey maturation, and then a unique American mash bill. Those things coming together. The whiskey world hadn't really seen anything like that before, and so we've been educating as we've been launching the brand.
Explain this Japanese approach to maturation, because this is something we didn't talk about last year when it was introduced.
Yeah, I would say a Japanese/Scottish influence on our finishing in particular, utilizing Pedro Jimenez sherry casks, but multiple fills, first, second, and a cheeky just little bit of third fill as well. That's an uncommon practice in the United States.
If I could add to that, Mark, our founder, Mrs. Knowles Carter, was very familiar with single malt Scotch whisky and Japanese whisky, and she liked the sort of nuanced flavour of that, whereas some of the more traditional styles like bourbon and such like very bold, full-on woody flavour. So that was something that we tried to work together to achieve, and for us, the final finishing period in the first fill and the refill PX sherry cask just gave that little bit of finesse, and it balanced out some of the more herbaceous nature of the rye.
Cameron, let's talk about your promotion to Master Blender, because you were not in that role when the brand was launched last year. How'd you get into the position?
Actually, I was in the role when the brand was launched as well, but I've been learning a lot from Dr. Bill Lumsden here for a number of years. In my previous role with Ardbeg, getting to see the whiskey production side and also working closely with the whiskey creation team at Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, there were a lot of learnings that I was able to take from that previous experience and roll into how we would roll out Sir Davis.
What did you learn from Bill specifically?
Ooh, man. First and foremost, some great jokes. But second, I would actually say there was something that he said to me a number of years ago that really has kind of stuck with me, and I mentioned it to him even last night, is that in the course of discovery, trying to prove theories, you're going to disprove two other theories that you've previously held. And that exploration is maddening, but it's also incredibly enticing as somebody who is always striving to figure out how something works.
Interesting. Tell me about your background, because I know you were an Ardbeg ambassador before you took this role on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of a background. I was politely asked to leave the university that I was attending, and that's what ended up forcing me into the bar and the restaurant industry after a number of years excelling as a bartender and running some of the premier cocktail establishments here in the United States and some actually of the wonderful whiskey bars here in the U.S. I fell in love with many of the different spirits that this world has to offer and started exploring them very much so in depth. Ultimately, that led me to the shores of Islay, where I fell in love with Ardbeg. And then I was offered a job as a ambassador for the full portfolio of Moet Hennessy. That was a number of years ago, and then immediately transitioned into the Ardbeg National Ambassador and kind of the head of the education program. And that's where Dr. Bill and I started to work very closely together, even had a little bit of an influence and peek behind the curtain of Ardbeg Wee Beastie. And I think, if I do say so myself, that was one of the opportunities that Bill and I had to really kind of understand the ways that we may potentially work together in the future. And then Sir Davis was born a number of years after that.
Tell me about your evolution as a blender over the last year.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. First off, my love of Scottish whiskies is what has allowed me to really bring, I think, some of the Scottish mentality to American whiskey. Some of the nuance that Dr. Bill was speaking about, you don't commonly see in American whiskey. Much like Americans ourselves, we're big, we're bold, and kind of bombastic in nature. American whiskey oftentimes behaves very similarly. So as a blender, trying to achieve some of the more delicate and nuanced flavor profiles, that's inspired wholly by what I've learned from Dr. Bill and the whiskey creation team back in Scotland as well.
This may be a sensitive question, but how do you get this brand to become mainstream and not just a brand for fans of Beyonce?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I think that's an incredibly important question as well, right? Mrs. Knowles Carter is an absolute she is a whiskey drinker through and through. And we know this because of the verbiage and the terminology that she used in our very first meeting. It was very indicative and very clear that she had spent a lifetime drinking and imbibing upon whiskey. So first and foremost, this is a very serious whiskey brand, and we take the liquid credibility, I think, more seriously than we take any other piece of the brand, because we know that great whiskey brands are built on the back of great juice and great product first and foremost. So we will always lead with the credibility of having unimpeachable whiskey before being caught up in the, I would even say, like the mainstream movement. This is a whiskey brand, as I had mentioned, that we need to continue to educate our new consumers that are entering the category, but also reassure connoisseurs and people who have been whiskey drinkers for a very long time that we understand the mode of operation of the American whiskey category, and we've intentionally deviated from some of the more classic approaches in American whiskey. You have to understand the rules before you can start to break them.
How so?
Well, take, for instance, even finishing, right? You think about the way that most American whiskey brands start to finish whiskey. It's by using casks one single time, right? And I believe that when you use a first fill, you're really extracting the previous occupant, not necessarily flavors and compounds coming from the structure or the hemicellulose of the oak. It's really about the previous occupant more so than the interaction of like the absorption that you'll get from the structure of the cask. When you start to use second and third fills, it's no longer as reliant upon the previous occupant, especially if you start to stagger the finishing times. For instance, for us, the first fills are a very short finish. The second fill's a bit longer. The third fill's much longer than the seconds, right? So for us, there's a really interesting conversation that we get to have that's very layered around not only the previous occupant, but then also protecting the sanctity of our mash bill while also extracting some of the deeper, richer flavors coming from the structure of the oak as well.
Tell me about the plans for a brand home in Houston for the brand. What can you say about that? They sort of leaked it a little bit to me here.
Yeah, obviously our Houston heritage is very important, just as important as it is to our founder, of course, being a proud Houstonian. So making sure that Houston is our home ground, first and foremost, is very important to us. We are in works of a production facility in Houston where finishing, blending, and bottling will all happen. The timeline on that, I can't give you, especially not over the recording, but know that it is absolutely in the works.
You'll find my tasting notes for Sir Davis at the WhiskyCast website. But in the meantime, let's begin the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the Garavogue 20-year-old Irish single malt. It's bottled at 47% ABV and, as Helen Mulholland told us, is finished in 8 different types of casks. The nose has touches of honey, caramel, dried fruits, and a hint of maltiness. The taste is peppery and sweet, with white pepper, barley sugar, honey, toffee, and ginger snap cookies. The finish is long with a subtle hint of ginger. It's an impressive whiskey, and I'm scoring the Garavogue single malt a 95. Next up, let's look at the High West Prisoner's Share 2025 release that I mentioned during the news. It's bottled at 51% ABV, and the nose has touches of red grapes, honey, brown sugar, and a hint of oak. There's a strong red wine influence at first, along with notes of white pepper and cinnamon, grape must in the background, and a touch of honey. The finish is long with red grapes and lingering spices, and I'm scoring the 2025 High West Prisoner's Share a 93. I received a sample of the Redemption 18-year-old bourbon that Alan Kennedy told us about during the news. It's bottled at 51.7% ABV, and the nose has touches of oak shavings, leather, tobacco, cooked fruits, and molasses. The taste has a nice balance of black pepper, cinnamon, and cherry cobbler, along with a soft oakiness and hints of leather and tobacco. The finish is long and dry with lingering spices and touches of cherries and oak. I'm scoring the Redemption 18-year-old bourbon a 94. Finally, let's look at the two President's Choice whiskeys from Old Forester. My sample of the bourbon was bottled at 60.25% ABV, and the nose is full of caramel, charred oak, baking spices, honey, and vanilla. The taste is creamy and spicy with black pepper, cinnamon, and clove notes, balanced by black cherries, honey, and caramel sweetness. The finish is long with a lingering touch of cinnamon, and I'm scoring the Old Forester President's Choice Bourbon a 93. Now, the rye is bottled at 58.55% ABV, and the nose has baking spices, rye bread, molasses cookies, honey, vanilla, and a soft oakiness. The taste is chewy and thick with cloves, cinnamon, and allspice notes, complemented by honey, vanilla, and molasses in the background. And the finish is long and spicy with a hint of charred oak. I'm scoring the President's Choice Rye a 94. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com. Let's open up the inbox now and see what people are talking about in our community segment. Last week in our Behind the Label segment, I referred to the Red Book of Ossory as the earliest written reference to whiskey, or aquavitae at the time, and that it proved Ireland was the source of whiskey. Greg Miller took exception to my reference and emailed this comment. Hi, Mark. The Red Book of Ossory has a copy of a recipe for aquavitae from wine and has nothing to do with whiskey. It's medicinal, not recreational. Recipes of this sort trace to the 12th century in Italy. There's a lot of misinformation pointing to Ireland as the origin of whiskey. The truth will probably never be known with certainty, but sure wouldn't rule out Scotland based on the Red Book. Greg, you make some very good points, and we'll probably never will know the whole story of whiskey's origins. Thanks for your email. Noel Harity posted this note in the WhiskyCast community app. Visited the Teeling Whiskey Distillery in Dublin yesterday. Was a good experience, and while there, I got 2 more people to listen to the podcast and 1 to download the app. So, a productive day overall. Sláinte. Thanks for your help, Noel. We get our best references by word of mouth, so if you like WhiskyCast, tell your friends, or even a stranger. And if you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store and join the conversation. You can also find us on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on Blue Sky, X, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. We all know the role barley plays in Scotch whiskey production, but what about distilling other grains? There's a very short list of grains that are allowed to be used in Scotch whiskey production, according to Dr. Bill Lumsden, who sits on one of the Scotch Whisky Association's technical committees.
So this is something I only discovered myself relatively recently. And obviously we all know about using barley because it's the main cereal crop we use for single malt Scotch. It's all we're allowed to use. But you can use, to make grain whiskey, you can use barley, you can use corn, you can use wheat, you can use rye, and you can use oats. And that's it. You're not allowed to use anything else. And as I was mentioning earlier, the concept of single grain Scotch, and you can buy single grain Scotch, it's out there, and that will be made almost certainly with either corn or more commonly wheat. Because corn doesn't grow well in Scotland. It's imported from continental Europe, whereas wheat grows very well there. But it's not actually a single grain, because again, we're not allowed to use additional extraneous enzymes. So the enzymic power must come from cereal grains, and you're not going to malt corn, or you can malt wheat, but it's very difficult. So a typical single grain will be 90% wheat and 10% malted barley.
Arbiki and Inchdarney distilleries have produced whiskies made of rye, though they have to be labeled as single-grain Scotch whiskies under the Scotch Whisky Law of 2009. In fact, anything other than 100% malted barley has to be labeled as a single grain, no matter how many types of grain were used in making the whiskey. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us. Download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store, or find us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Discover the 2025 limited release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition, finished in Calvados apple brandy casks, a perfect fusion of craftsmanship and tradition. Here's to great whiskey and the game that inspires it.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2025, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.